Hello, everybody. Welcome. Do come in as usual. Come in, sit around the circle. I've got a gorgeous guest for you to meet today. But just before I start talking to Niki, I just want this thread that we're pulling through about Christian and I and our sort of new adventure. So the other day it was National Siblings Day, and I noticed it for the first time last year. It's obviously some kind of new thing, probably a money-making exercise, but I thought, well, there's going to be lots of siblings who are missing each other. Some of them might be in spirit, but otherwise they could be just separate in the physical, and I thought it would be nice to make a post about it. But while I was writing the post this year for it, Christian was like, right, we're going to sit down today. We're going to do something together, and we're going to sit down and we're going to write some long overdue letters that we should have written. But Hannah, wasn't ready to do them. But anyway, so on Saturday, I sat down with Christian and we wrote 5 letters. And it's all to do with finding his lost belongings, which are still in Mali, in Kita. So that's just a little update. Things are starting to move along. The other thing, I just have to tell you about, so I've got my lovely guest, Niki Shefras, with me today. And I first met Niki quite a long time ago. It was probably about 1.5 years, actually. And the minute I met her, we both had this click, like we had to know each other and we had to connect. And then I'm just going to bring Niki on because I want you to see where she is. So we're doing a live outside broadcast this evening, or it is this evening, obviously in the UK. Hi, Niki. Thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely lovely to see you as always.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It's always good to connect with you, Hannah. And just sitting in my gardens this afternoon. It was so beautiful out here earlier, but we had snow this morning here in the UK. So
we did. I was wondering if we'd be able to do the outside broadcast, but this is where Niki. So on the 21st of March 2020, just before our lockdown in the UK, I went to Niki's house and joined her. I'd never done a fire circle before. But Niki is firekeeper extraordinaire, and it was the first cacao ceremony I'd done as well. And you'll see behind her, Niki, do you want to just sort of explain the setup you have there and what your fire circles are all about?
I think first of all it's just that connection with nature, and I feel very blessed with where we live. We've got a stream at the bottom of the garden, so it's a wonderful opportunity to connect with all the elements here, and especially around the fire. But also I'm sure you can probably hear it, there's a total symphony of bird call, and we have all sorts of birds living in the area, so it's really quite special. And with the fire, there's something about being in circle around a fire, and especially with cacao, which is a very heart-opening plant medicine anyway. But it's something about really connecting to we always used to connect around fires. We always used to connect in circles, and there's a big part of that that's been lost. And I think it's bringing that back in this culture particularly, that's so important.
Yeah, so actually this year we've been able to do the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes around the fire. Yeah. And then I love the fire. The way Niki does it, we have it is so magical, isn't it? It's like this liminal space where we come in from the outside and everything that's been happening this year, and we are able to sit in a circle. And it's, we've had so many rules and sort of limitations on life weighing us down, and just being in nature and around the fire, it gives something special, doesn't it? It's that takes you sort of out of the comfort zone that we've been in really at home.
I think it's a couple of things. I think one is, as you say, it's like you create a sacred space. I mean, sacred space is all around us, but there's something about creating the intentionality around that and really being open and willing to connect. And as you say, it is this kind of liminal space. It's a doorway to something, and you can it's very tangible. I mean, you've noticed it when we've sat around the fire, when we open the space and we close the space. It's like when we close at the end, you can feel almost like a bubble disappearing. It's something almost tangible, and there's something about being able to connect in a way, and especially when you're in a circle where everyone's experience is valid and welcome, and oftentimes you find that it tends to we share same stories, and things come up that someone might not be prepared to say, but they can easily instantly connect with that. So it's a place of deep connection, really, and especially around the fire, which is, you know, one of the greatest teachers there is, around grandfather fire.
Yeah, because I know there's a difference between, I mean, there's obviously lots of people are sitting around fires at the moment, being, you know, in their gardens, but there's a completely different thing of sitting around with, you know, with a drink and chatting with friends and, you know, with your mates, and then sitting in circle in a sort of ceremonial way around a fire.
I think it's because when, again, it comes back to that intentionality of what are you coming to it with, and the idea when we sit around the fire, as you know, we make offerings to the fire first, and there's this very symbiotic relationship with it, and fire heals and transforms. It's the language of symbolism. It awakens ancestral memories within us, and there's something about that when you connect to that, you start to ignite literally within you your own sense of magic, and remember really what it is to be connected. And I think that so often, you know, we live life, I'm speaking generically here, but we live life asleep. And, you know, when we start to connect to this with nature itself and all the elements, and remember that then you know, I'm an animist at heart. I think that I believe in the spirit and everything. And when you recognize that, everything just comes alive and life just feels so much richer.
It does. And I know you was telling me you did something a bit different the other night, just to take yourself out of the box.
So I think it's important to touch on that. So Hannah and I were talking the other day, and I think now more than ever, our comfort zones are the cycle. It's getting smaller and smaller. You know, our sense of, especially given our current situation, and the without going into it, but our sense of pushing ourselves out of our boundaries is really important. It's really important to do that. Otherwise, we just get too comfortable and it starts to condense and get smaller and smaller, and our experience becomes smaller and smaller. And so it's just a really, really small and silly thing the other day. I just slept out under the stars in the garden. I mean, probably not the best night for it. It was a little bit windy and it wasn't the clearest of skies, but it was beautiful nonetheless. And what I did find was, in the same way that the fire, as you well know, and awakened something. There was something about being outside and sleeping under the trees and seeing them move above me, and it awakened a time of when that used to be normal. You know, sleeping under the stars was something normal rather than my comfy bed. And I think it's just about pushing comfort zones wherever we can at the moment, so we don't live a limited existence, but we experience what it means to live all of life in all of its beauty and colours.
Yeah, it's almost like being childlike again, isn't it? And remembering there's something about sitting around a fire in community where it's like it's so deeply I remember doing it at some time, you know, this connection with our, just returning to what we have always been doing, and what we are used to. And we just, in our lives now, we just don't get that connection so much. I mean, I suppose we have more with nature now. We've all slowed down and we've been able to spend a lot more time in nature, but remembering that sacred connection that we had, and being the animist, like there's a spirit in everything, isn't there? Can you just explain a bit more about your beliefs of nature? And
well, everything sounds silly said, but everything's alive. It has spirit, and it's, I think, just to touch on what you said, it's that finding the joy within, and coming back to ourselves and remembering what we know is there, but we can't quite connect with it because it's been, we used to be tribal people. We used to live in very, very connected to the lands, and for the last few thousand years that's become more and more removed. Life has become more and more comfortable, and our communication with our surroundings has become more and more limited. And I think it's opening up that dialogue again. It's opening up and finding ways. And I truly believe when you start to communicate with nature, or when you open that dialogue up, it is met, it is heard, and there is a reciprocal relationship. I mean, I think I might have mentioned to you, or maybe not, but one time I was singing by a stream, and literally the tree next to me, suddenly before I knew it, it was just full of birds. And I truly felt that there was this connection there, that I was suddenly one and part of everything else. And it sounds a bit, I don't know, that might sound odd for some people if they're not used to thinking like that, but genuinely, the more we appreciate what we have around us, and that we are stewards of these lands rather than taking for granted everything that we have around us, the more we have a hope of living in a harmonious way on this planet, not just with each other, but with our surroundings and everything else. Currently, we live in such a cut-off, separate way. And even within ourselves, disconnected from our own hearts, disconnected from each other, and disconnected from the place around us, when as humans we yearn for connection, we yearn to be connected to something bigger. And I think that's also coming back to the fire. What it does, it reminds us that we're part of something bigger and greater. And it's so important for us to have that. And I think so many people are looking for it, but are maybe confused as to where to look, because maybe traditional religions or maybe traditional ways of being haven't served them. I don't know. I just think that there's something about coming back to that basic dialogue, and it can be really, really simple. It can be really simple, and just acknowledging the presence of something that's living next to you. Just because it doesn't talk in our language doesn't mean it doesn't have its own language. The trees have root systems under the ground that have an amazing connection and between them all. And in certain traditions, or earth-based traditions, refer to the animals and the plants and trees and everything else as brothers and sisters. We're all part of the same family, and I think that's what's really helpful to remember that.
Yeah. And how do you, for listeners, if they're sort of thinking, oh my goodness, yes, for what you're saying about that connection that we need to reconnect with, is there sort of simple practices that you can sort of talk us through about how to connect, or how you sort of speak and connect with your environment?
I think it starts with little things. It's just, it can be as simple as when you're in the shower in the morning, acknowledging the water and its cleansing qualities, and it's and acknowledging, how lucky we are to have fresh water. It starts, I think oftentimes it starts from a place of gratitude. I know it sounds cliche, but it really does, because with the gratitude you start to open your heart, and your listening isn't from your mind, you're listening through your heart, and your quality of attendance becomes that much richer. So I think, you can start by, in the shower, just becoming conscious and aware of the water over you. When you're eating, realizing where, when you're the fruits and vegetables, even when you're preparing your fruits and vegetables and your food, and remembering where that's come from this land, that's nourishing your body. It's starting to remember that cycle. And then I think a big one is just really slowing down and listening. I know, I make this practice for myself to make me slow down in some ways. The world's very speeded up, and the more we slow down, the more we stay. It's like the rolling wheel. When you're driving along, you're going so fast, it's a blur as you go by, but as soon as you start slowing down, you can pick up the details and the colors, and it becomes that much richer. And I think that's what it is. It's coming down and appreciating the essence of things and slowing down and being aware of your surroundings. And, you know, the cliches of, you know, stop to smell the roses, they're cliches because they work. Stop and smell the roses, appreciate how amazing they smell, you know. Foraging's a great one. I mean, I forage with a friend, and I mean, I'm quite lucky. I've got a garden full of wild garlic, so I come out and I pick the wild garlic, and then I eat that, and I'm like, wow, I just picked this out of my garden. It's pretty special when you think about it. So I think the main ones is just becoming more aware on a micro level, slowing down, opening your heart through gratitude, and beginning to really appreciate the wonder and the mystery of all we have around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you have, when we're around the fire, you have this, it's very, very obvious, this gratitude that you give to the fire, to the elements, to everything that's around us. Can you sort of explain why you give gratitude to Grandfather Fire, to all the elements around you?
I think part of it is an acknowledgement of the beauty and the magic, as I said earlier, that we have around us. The other part is, again, is that just as I'm sitting here, a couple of blue tits, they're literally just just flown out next to us. Anyway, the other part is really, again, that sense of gratitude, but it's also, it's like, you know, you're presenting yourself to something, and instead of just going and asking for something, it's about starting that reciprocity, starting that sense of exchange, and coming with the, almost like coming with a gift and an offering and a thank you. You know, I was speaking with a teacher of mine, and he says that, you know, in prayers they never ask for anything. Their prayers are of gratitude. The only thing that they ask for is that spring will come again next year, which I think is just beautiful. And again, it's this, like, always asking, but what are we bringing? And how can we bring more? And how can it be, instead of always about, you know, what can you do for me? What can I do for you? How can I humbly bring myself forward in front of this great mystery, this amazing experience of life? How can I bring myself truly, authentically, and make my offering and my contribution? So, you know, it's this idea of gratitude and cycle and reciprocity.
Yeah, because we talk a lot, actually, or I talk a lot on the podcast about asking spirit for help, and I do always forget now. And now you've sort of saying it again, is that giving gratitude for what you've already had from spirit, or what you are receiving, and then asking for support. And I know we've talked about the right way of asking for support from spirit when you're around a fire, and what you're being given, so lessons, but we've talked about the right questions. Can you just talk us through the right questions that to be asking of spirit after and in between receiving and giving thanks?
I think there's a couple of things just to unpick that a little bit. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong way. I think the way is through the heart. And again, it's coming back to that authenticity and tuning in and just being really real with it. And oftentimes, I mean, in my own practice, I know that I've cut myself off, as you know, we're all on this learning journey, and I have to really consciously tune in and make sure that that's the place I'm speaking from. Or, you know, when I do my yoga practice in the morning, I make sure that until I felt that I'm really connected, I don't want to get up off my mat. I want to make sure that I'm like, that's the space I'm going to create my day from. So that's one bit. There's no right or wrong. And I think that, you know, there's an element that, you know, I noticed that since I've changed how how appreciative I am for things. My just things come much more freely and fluidly into my life, because I genuinely walk with this just awe and gratitude for life. And don't get me wrong, it hasn't always been, we've all had our ups and downs, but it's that genuine heartfelt honesty. But going back to your questions, I think that there are certain questions that and again, it's like the questions you ask will dictate to a certain degree the answer you get. So you can ask a question of, oh, why is this happening to me? Well, what is the quality of that answer going to be? But if you can ask a question, what is happening here? Or what is this teaching me? Or what can I learn from this, and how can I use this information to help others? You can see that it's the same kind of thing, but you're just reframing it and framing it in a way that you can have a much more expansive response.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's an idea that you're expecting the good. Like, what am I learning from this? How can I what am I being shown? And it's a positive thing, isn't it? And it's a growth and expecting the best. Things are happening for you rather than sort of
to you.
Yeah.
But I think there's another element to it, and like, even in, when I look at all the shitty patches in my life, and there have been some really sticky ones, all of that stuff is so, is truly the manure for the seeds to come through. That's, it's not all roses. Every rose has a thorn, and that is part of the beauty and the growth. And I think that's the other way to flip the frame, is instead of thinking about it in a sort of a why me context, it's like, okay, this, in the wider scheme, this is just part of what I need to go through right now, and part of my learning journey. This is part of what I need to experience. But making sure you don't miss the gift in that, because there's a gift in all of it. And yeah, when I look back at those tricky times that I've been through, there's been some really rich manure there. I mean, it was tough, don't get me wrong, but that's what's caused the beautiful flowers to grow.
Yeah. Can you sort of tell us a bit about your background? It's probably a good time to do that now, where I know you've done a lot of traveling. And
okay. I grew up in the UK, and at the age of 19, 20, I went on a 2-week holiday to Miami. I'd finished university, I'd worked my tail off all the way through, and a 2-week holiday. And when I got there, I was like, wow, this is interesting, exciting. I was 20 years old, the world was at my feet, and I ended up staying. And I ended up living in the States for a couple of years, and then moving to the Caribbean. At the time, the reason I went, because this is before 9/11, when traveling was slightly different, and I basically needed to go across a border to get a stamp on my passport to stay another 6 months. And I ended up staying in the Caribbean, and running a series of beautiful, actually, restaurants out there. And I was 20 years old. I had 100 people working for me. I was just like, I don't know how. I was probably 21. So, and just fell into this, and it was really an amazing experience, and an amazing place to live. And then I was there almost 10 years, and then I moved to Spain, because it was time to come back to Europe. Moved to Spain, lived in Spain, and ended up working in a very different field, in professional sports. And I really enjoyed living there. And I think just without going into all the details, what was interesting was living in these different cultures. I also lived in Israel for a couple of years. It's a whole other story. But living in these different cultures, and times when I didn't speak the language, or I was an ethnic minority, or, I had this really vast experience of moving in these diverse, different spaces. And And the beauty of it and what it taught me really was, and actually coming full circle back to the UK, which was by far the hardest move after living 20 years abroad, the hardest move I ever made. What I really gleaned from it a lot, but one of the main things was seeing the box and the social constraints of what we live and grow up in. Because as soon as you step outside that, you can see, hang on a minute, it's not done like that everywhere. And you start to realize your societal conditioning. And the more you move and the more you travel, the more you see it apparent in different places. And it was an incredible gift for me to be able to see what I wanted to take on board and say, yeah, that's worthy, I'm keeping that. And that I'm discarding because actually it doesn't seem to have any, doesn't enrich in my life. And it was an amazing learning experience, 20 years living in different places in the world, and I feel coming back on that circle just very, very grateful to be back in the UK. I never imagined that I guess at the time I didn't think that I would end up back here, but I love it. And what I'm finding, and this is where it all comes back to this nature connection again, is like the more rooted I am to nature and the more I connect with it, the easier I find life, the easier I journey through the different seasons. 20 years I was living in the sunshine place. Now, winter is like, ooh. But actually I revel in it in a different way now. And it's connecting to the cycle of life and the seasons and what the gift that each season brings that really makes living here and makes me feel grounded and rooted in quite a special way.
Oh, it's funny because I didn't realize actually how long you'd stayed in the Caribbean before. And of course, Christian traveled really widely in the Caribbean. He was going all over the islands and he did that for sort of 18 months. So, I mean, I know Christian always joins us in the circle. And I know why, and because he loves you, I have to say he does, Niki, and it's perfectly obvious. And you also speak Spanish as well, which Christian was good at Spanish, and I know you actually speak 4 different languages, don't you? So you've had, and what you were saying about moving around and observing other cultures, other people, the ways of doing. Is that how you found the circles, these fire ceremonies?
I think it was the yearning that was there. For as long as I can remember, I've had a really unusual professional career, which has been amazing, but all the while I had this real yearning. The sort of the mystical, magical side of life has always tantalized me, I guess, and I've always been yearning to connect with it. And it's always run parallel, but it was kind of this, it wasn't ever really out in the open. It wasn't, unless it was with certain people. You know what I mean? And I think, how did I find it? I think it was just connecting with, finding traditions where we could really connect in that way would just became more and more important, and just an actual necessity almost, something so vital to be able to share that space, that magical space around the fire.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, until I'd done a ceremony around the fire or just sat in circle, I didn't know that I was missing it.
Yeah.
But now we've been able to do it regularly. If I couldn't sit around the fire on these main cycles in the year, I would really, really miss it. It really does give me something.
Oh, lovely to hear. I think it's you absolutely touch on it. There's something that sparks that ancestral remembrance within us when we're around there. This is why it's such a magical thing in so many ways. It just reminds us, in that real sense of remember to remember. It's like before we come down and incarnate on this world in this physical plane, it's like remember to remember. Don't bring those things forth. I think that's one thing. And then the punctuating it around the cycles during the year. it's really helpful because it also helps reminds us, it keeps us in that cycle around the year. It reminds us that spring, time to blossom, be creative, launch projects, bursting forth. You've got this fragility of the first flowers when they come through, but the absolute strengths it takes to break through the ground, and then as you come into summer and the energy changes again, and you get these longer days and the heat, and it's a little bit lazier, and then you have this intense activity at certain points, and reminding us how we incorporate that in our daily life, how we incorporate that in our own sense of projects, and why wouldn't we align ourselves with the most amazing, perfect pattern of nature or archetype to live by. I mean, if there's ever a more perfect example of what we need to do, it's here all around us, but so often we ignore it and use it as if it was there for our taking, instead of listening in and tuning into that deeper wisdom that would actually show us how to live more harmoniously with life.
Yeah, and it's also sorry, and it also just marking the simple process of just marking the the year, the quarters and parts of the year. It really does slow down life. Just
And
completely noticing and
yeah, I think so. And it also, instead of having a monthly, you've got these roughly 6-week periods, and it allows you to stop and take stock of, okay, and it's also acts as a kind of a thermometer on your life. Okay, where am I at? What's working? What's not? What's time to let go? What's time to bring forth? What's time to sow? You can do it by the moon as well. You've got those other cycles within the cycles, but it's incredibly potent stuff. And I don't know, for me it just helps me feel more connected, and it's made my living in these lands so much richer. And I didn't think like that when I was living here, when I was up to 20 years old. When I didn't think that way, but now it's fundamental, and it's like, not just around the fire remembering to remember, but it's like remembering the roots of how we were connected to these lands before. The medicine is everywhere around us. It's whatever is imbued with the ability to teach us, or for us to be able to learn, and it's just slowing down and listening in. And
it's sort of getting lessons from nature. I often do like do a walk. I imagine you probably do the same thing. I've got a question or something that I would like some guidance on, and I'll go off very sort of slowly on a walk, and I'll notice sort of 3 things maybe which are really speaking to me somehow. It could be a bird or something that I repeat seeing, or something about the blossoms. Or do you do that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point, and one for your listeners, that you asked earlier about ways to connect. It's such an obvious one in many ways, but it's again, ask the question, what's troubling you? Where just put it out there. We're not alone in this. Just put it out there, but again, frame it in a way that you allow a response that's expansive to come back to you, and one that can support you rather than that's narrow and going in. And yeah, I do. And I think and other things I've done that have been really quite interesting is setting intentions for my walks. So last winter, for example, and it was cold and it was muddy, and I was just like, today I'm going to play. Because I wanted to again find that joy. How do we find the joy in these things if we don't start bringing it through and making it happen? It's not just, oh, today I'm going to be joyful. No, you've got to find ways to experience that and bring it forward. I said, right, I'm going to play in nature. I mean, there was, I took my welly boots off. I was in puddles. My partner said to me, what are you doing? You're mad. You're going to have wet feet for the rest of the walk. I was like, no, I can't ignore this calling. I need to do it for some reason. Oh my goodness, I had so much fun that day. And I think it was because, it's such a silly example, but I was intentional about, opening up that dialogue and saying, right, today I'm going to have a really fun, joyful day. And it was really fun and joyful. It all sounds silly when you repeat it back, but it was profound at the time.
Oh, but that's all part of the like just being childlike about it, isn't it? It's not being, it's just like just being in nature and being joyful about being there and being on this earth and being grounded to it. It is, it's a really joyous thing.
I think that there's something like, you know, we get so entrenched in our lives and our habits and the daily routine and the earning the money and the, you know, the adult stuff. And it's that bringing that sense of joy and that childlike spirit to things that is so important. And play. I mean, when was the last time we played? You know, this sense of play is so important, but often it's sort of relegated to just children's stuff. I don't want to stop playing.
No, why? I know if we sort of talking about if we now move on to talking about the fire and the circle and the connectivity between people, you know, at the moment we're all sort of still in this social distancing and there's a lot of fear still around. But when I first came into the circle, my experience was actually, it was quite unnerving at first because there were quite a few people that I didn't know. But the connection that you have around the fire and sort of sharing, it's really this sharing, isn't it, of just that connection and sharing with people and the honesty that kind of comes out around the fire. I mean, is there what's the sort of alchemy around the fire? What does the fire do? It's obviously ancestral and ritual, but can you put your finger on what it does?
I think it's a number of things. It's like when we walk into that circle, we drop everything. You know, it's there's something about the connectedness, about the space, creating a space to be able to share, and a space that's held and respected and honored, and there's an honoring of each other in the circle. And we've celebrated and practiced ritually in circles for centuries, you know, eons. And I think we touched on it earlier. It's like there's also you tap into the not only the individual experience but the shared collective that comes through, and there's something about being in circle that everything seems to get mirrored in there, and you get the possibility to see things and work things out, and it becomes very apparent very quickly when there's a lack of authenticity. It's like there's no space for that lack of authenticity, because even that in itself is showing something up. Even that's showing something, that it's just a space where you get to be, not even that, it's just such a held space that everyone is totally themselves and is able to bring forth what they need to in that moment. But it's a lesson for everyone around there. There's always something in there for everyone in that circle, always. It's incredible really when you think about it, because it's such a simple thing, yet it's so rich.
Yeah, and it's allowing, I think it's allowing everybody to have a say as well. So the principle of the fires is everyone takes their turn to speak, and you are listened to. And I think maybe in these days we want to be more listened to, and it's a healing process, isn't it? And the sort of, I know you were telling me about so the grandmothers and the warriors and the children, sort of the basics of the fire in other cultures, where if you can explain it, how they sort of heal and have peaceful relations around a fire.
In some indigenous earth-based communities, or they would you'd have the leaders that would be around the fire, and based on how So start again, sorry. So you'd have them sitting around the fire, and you'd have your war chiefs and your peace chiefs and your law council and all the things that it takes that you would need in society. And actually we have that within us as well. But the children and the mothers the children would have their voice represented, which is, as you said, everyone has their voice represented and everyone has this moment to be heard. But you would never talk across the fire. So the mothers would never sit next to the children, so they wouldn't be able to cut them off. So all voices were welcome. But you'd always have the children's fire at the center of that. And based on, for true leadership to really happen, it's based on the fact that no decision, no action of any kind would be permitted from the council that would do any harm to the children. And that way it ensured that the future generations were protected, and it ensured, also like the 7 generation principle. And it's like that should be in the DNA of every leadership, because when you've got the children at the center of the fire, you're always ensuring, a future harmonious future for them. You're always ensuring that they're protected, rather than, I think, the center of the fire, even if there is one with our leaders today, it seems to be money and economy and totally, anyway, another conversation for another time. But going back to what you were saying, it's, it's a place where all voices can be heard.
And what it makes me sad that we're not all sitting around fires to make peace and to hear everybody's point of view, and those that don't have necessarily the voice in society. I'm thinking more, actually at the moment I'm thinking more of teenagers and young adults who quite rightly at the moment are probably feeling pretty lost and in this world that they're living in, and the opportunities that are being restricted. And we talked about this actually last time we were around the fire, to have teenagers around the fire and young adults around the fire with I was going to say us elders, but not us elders, but as guides almost into how to use the fire.
Yeah, a safe space and a sounding board. I think it's so important now with the teenagers. What outlet do they have? What computer? It's very, and it's such a sort of a difficult growth time anyway. And I think it will be very, very beneficial. And just going back a step, I think that the leadership model needs to be totally overhauled, because the priorities we have right now is, especially in this culture, I mean, even just not even just in this country, it's just shocking. The lack of principle, lack of integrity, honesty, truth, wisdom, I don't see any of this apparent in them. And these are fundamental qualities that need to be there. So
absolutely, yeah, again, we need to get everybody around the fire, don't we, and have those principles. But yeah, I was just thinking, just when we were talking about the sort of losing our way in life, and I know when I was a 20-something and Christian was also 20-something, we were kind of knowing that there was more to life out there and that we were here to do something, but it's having that clarity. And I was never, I spent, Christian and I both spent loads of time outside. We used to live on a farm, we were always out and about, but it was having that sort of guidance. And I think if I'd had a fire to sit around with all the different sort of generations, I would have been sort of fast tracked into understanding what was required of me.
I think we're missing the elders. We're missing them. It's in our society, say our society here, just using the UK, relegated to old people's homes and it's almost secondary citizens as such, instead of having a chance to share that wisdom and sharing their experience. And we very much value youth in society, and beauty, and it doesn't allow for that wisdom to be passed down. I mean, and the other thing, I mean, this obvious thing is, around the fire, people would share their stories. Stories would get handed down generation upon generation. Songs would be sung honoring our ancestors, and there was a history there, a woven history that we don't seem to have. We don't, even just singing, and other cultures have it. I remember when I was spent some time in South America, after dinner, everyone would get out their guitars and we'd all be singing. And I don't think I've ever been to a household in the UK where people have just got out their musical instruments and had a jam session. Maybe I was going to the wrong houses, but you know what I mean? It's not interwoven in our culture in the same way as what I mean. It's not exactly mainstream, but it's
so I was just going to say that the rites of passage, for adolescents moving into adulthood, for getting married, all these and obviously grief and death, and that would have all been around the fire, wouldn't it, in community and all those rites of passages.
Well, in some traditions, and in our earlier tribal cultures, as you go from passing into womanhood, or young boys becoming men, they would go on a vision quest. They would go and they would have something. It's like that overcoming something to come back. And again, talking of rites of passage, these transitional phases, and I think it's very, very big right now. Death in our culture, I mean, it's not handled in a way that we appreciating life through it. It's this finality, because we don't understand life, and that's why people are so fearful of it, and it's not celebrated in the right way, and it's handled in it doesn't feel natural to me how it's handled in this culture. And I mean, this is something only too well, and it's how can we shift that? Because I think that whole idea around death right now is very obviously, with the whole, dare I use the COVID word, but keep people safe at all costs. But at what cost? Isn't it better to die an honorable life, surrounded by to die and surrounded by your loved ones, in a way that is, your passing is nurtured rather than in a place where you might be on your own in the middle of a ward somewhere with no one around you. Oh, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But there's something around how we deal with our rites of passage in this culture that's I don't think we do. It's really lacking, and I think that really counts for a lot.
Yeah, because I've done quite a lot of research into sort of the indigenous ways of celebrating death and a grief process. And I was actually talking to somebody the other day about like after a year you have a ceremony of the tears, I think it was called, where you're celebrating all the firsts that happen after a year of death. So the first time you would, I don't know, the first birthday, the first anniversaries of this and that, Christmas, obviously not Christmas, but that year would be a whole year that you could have to mourn. Whereas we don't have that, do we? We're sort of like a few months after it. You should be all right now. Get on with it.
Well, we don't have these initiations or these ritual practices or these transitions. There's no transition to support that, and I think it's really important to look at how we can bring them forth in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you I know we were just talking about being in circle and releasing things into the fire, so that the alchemy that happens around the fire, it seems a kind of nice way to sort of finish the discussion in terms of what can you release to the fire. I know we've done quite a few different things.
I think it comes back to a dialogue and anything that you want to release. So oftentimes I might say a prayer. So there's some, I'll put something in the fire, saying a prayer of something that I want to let go of, and be a way of being or an emotion or something stuck, and have that, and make a ritual practice over that. But you can also release into the fire your prayers, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations, how you dreaming in a beautiful world, and dreaming in a more harmonious way of living, dreaming in whatever it is you want for your life, and offer and make an offering at the same time. So anything really. I mean, it's your dialogue, it's your conversation.
Okay, so if people are sitting without access to a fire, can you do this with candles? How can you sort of adapt this to everyday living?
Like a ritual practice with a candle. You can sit and, like, even when you light that candle, what are you lighting the candle for? Is there something, when I light a candle in the morning, I say a little prayer of what I want to bring in that day. It could be anything. You can make an offering if you like. It's that dialogue. The flame is still there. It's the one flame of all the fires. They're all connected. It's not that it's just your separate flame in your room. No, it's all connected.
Yes, that's key, isn't it, actually? Because I do think when you're, certainly for me, when being around the fire, you're connecting to not just everybody around the fire, but you're connecting to ancestors.
Yeah.
So I know when you light a fire, you always use the ashes from the previous fire, don't you?
Yeah, when I'm making the fire at the beginning, I'll always keep some of the ashes from a previous fire and use them. So it's like all of the thoughts and the beauty and the intention it feels like it gets stronger and stronger. And I add some rose petals and some cedar or some tobacco and use that at the heart of the fire, and with prayer. And I think that's, again, it comes down to that intentionality of how you build it. And again, for someone practicing in their home, if they don't have access to the fire, you can, in the same way you can access all the elements, you can build a little altar, you can have your candle on there, you could have a little cup of water, you could have something that represents the earth, be it a crystal or a plant, flower. You can start to bring these practices in and start honoring it in the way that works for you. It's all about how it works for you and what feels seamless and fluid in your life. So make a small altar, make that a place where you start to enter into that dialogue and connection on a daily basis. Start doing that, and it's like anything, friendships grow over time. It's not like, these things take time and love. And so I think that's a really nice way to do it, to an altar practice as well.
Yeah, that's a really lovely idea. And if we're talking about the ancestors again, what do you feel? So if we're sort of receiving and giving to them as well, what can they sort of help with, or what can we learn from them?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think that it's there's so much. I mean, I find that, like, stuff is, wow. So traumas, we can have ancestral traumas in our lineage, and they're almost like shadows that exist within us. And it's how can we heal our own stuff that then heals everything back and forward, so then our children don't then carry those traumas through. So again, in the same way that the dialogue with nature or with the fire or with the elements or whatever it is, you can have that same dialogue with your ancestors. And I say a prayer for mine, that those who haven't lived well, died well, or passed well, I say a prayer that they might be guided to the light, that they might find wholeness and peace and love. And I think that there's, what can you learn from them? So much. But I think the key point is, we're here, right now. It's almost like that seed of potentiality. You can use the analogy of the seed in the same way of, where it's put all the elements around it and it grows into something strong, but it's the past, present and future in that one seed. And the same as us, we are the past and present and future. We are all of, 7 generations behind us and the 7 generations forwards. And we here right now, what can we do to mend those things within ourselves, that we might live a better life and hopefully shift something so that forward for our children, they might then grow and build a better life for themselves.
Oh, absolutely. It does rely on us doing the work, doesn't it? And we've run out of time, Niki. Our session, the episodes always go so quickly. But if you just, if people are interested about you and the work that you do you have a website you can send people to?
Yes, thevidasana.com. The Vida Sana, and Vida's Vida, Sana SANA.com. And Vida means life in Spanish, and Sana is healthy or whole. So it's all about healthy and whole, and connection to ourselves, each other, and our environment.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. And like, if anybody gets the opportunity to sit around a fire with Niki, please do take it. Next week, I have a lovely lady from the Gold Coast in Australia, and I talked to her. It's about her son who died suddenly, but she, like myself, and we've just touched on it with Niki actually, about taking the gifts out of difficult times and the gifts from loss, and what we can learn to make a more purposeful and joyful life moving forward. So that's next week with Karen Chaston. And I must thank again, Niki, thank you so much for joining me from your beautiful garden. And the birds were quite well behaved, weren't they?
And thankfully they stopped, actually when we started they stopped, they don't know what they were doing, hammering or doing something over there, so we were lucky.
Well, they can carry on now, can't they?
Exactly. Thank you so much. Always good to see you and connect with you.
All right, lovely. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you for listening to The Finder of Lost Things. I think we've been triggered so long and so hard by COVID, and it's going to carry on. People are getting used to stillness, and they're getting used to more solitude. But how do you use that time for the highest good? This process that we're going to explore will bring back the joy and purpose to life. That wholeness, that sort of harmony and flow and togetherness. People are really ready to find their lost parts now. You can find me at hannahvelton.online.